Rewire your brain without miracles. 7 minutes of non-judgmental attention. Husserl, Jung. Imagine a world where the constant hum of your own thoughts, the ceaseless parade of judgments, fears and desires, doesn't dictate your reality. What if you could simply observe this internal theatre without being swept away by every drama, every perceived crisis? Most of us live as if our every fleeting thought, our every emotional surge is an undeniable truth, a decree from on high that must be obeyed, analyzed, or resisted. We are prisoners in the castle of our own minds, convinced that the bars are made of steel, when in reality they are often forged from nothing more than a habitual, unexamined attention. This is the subtle tyranny of our inner monologue, the relentless self-criticism that whispers doubts, the anxious projections that paint futures with grim strokes, the nostalgic reveries that hold us captive to a past that no longer exists. We are so accustomed to this internal cacophony that we mistake it for the very fabric of consciousness, failing to recognize that there is a vaster, quieter space within, a witness that can observe the storm without being consumed by it. The pursuit of peace, of clarity, of a life lived with genuine intention often feels like a monumental task, a quest for a miracle cure for the inherent messiness of being human. We seek external solutions, grand gestures, life-altering epiphanies, believing that only a seismic shift can dislodge us from the patterns that bind us. But what if the most profound transformation doesn't require a miracle at all? What if it begins with a simple yet radical shift in how we attend to our own experience, a gentle reorientation of our awareness that costs nothing but demands everything? This internal landscape, often a source of turmoil, is also the very ground of our being, the fertile soil from which all experience springs. We are not merely the sum of our thoughts or the product of our emotions. We are the consciousness that perceives them. Yet, we are so deeply identified with the content of our minds that we rarely, if ever, step back to acknowledge the container. This identification creates a perpetual cycle of reaction, a dance where we are constantly trying to control, to fix, to change the very things that arise from our own awareness. We chase happiness by acquiring, by achieving, by becoming someone else, all while the source of genuine contentment remains untouched, waiting patiently within. The yearning for something more, for a deeper connection, for a sense of purpose that transcends the daily grind, is a universal echo of our souls. It's the quiet whisper of the divine within us, reminding us of our true nature, a nature that is not defined by our limitations, but by our boundless potential for awareness. This longing is not a sign of deficiency, but a sacred invitation to explore the depths of our inner world, to understand the intricate workings of our psyche not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be embraced. The illusion we often fall prey to is that our thoughts and feelings are objective realities, external forces acting upon us. We speak of being overwhelmed by anxiety, crippled by sadness, as if these states possess an independent agency. This language reinforces the idea that we are passive recipients of our inner experience, rather than active participants in its unfolding. But the truth, as explored by thinkers who delved into the very nature of consciousness, suggests a different relationship. It suggests that by changing our attention, we can fundamentally alter our relationship with our inner world. This isn't about suppressing thoughts or denying emotions. It's about cultivating a different mode of engagement, one that is characterized by a clear, unfettered observation. It's about recognizing that the vast majority of what troubles us originates not in external circumstances, but in the way we process, interpret, and cling to our internal narratives. The constant churn of mental activity, the automatic judgments and evaluations create a distorted lens through which we view ourselves and the world. This unexamined attention is the engine of much of our suffering. a self-perpetuating cycle of reactivity that keeps us trapped in a loop of discontent. Consider the pervasive feeling of being out of control, a hallmark of modern anxiety. We strive to meticulously plan, to anticipate every variable, to micromanage our lives and the lives of those around us, all in a desperate attempt to ward off uncertainty. This relentless pursuit of control is, paradoxically, the very thing that fuels our unease. It stems from a deep-seated belief that we must exert influence, that yielding to the natural flow of life is a sign of weakness or failure. We become so engrossed in the act of controlling that we lose touch with the simple act of being. This is where the wisdom of contemplative traditions and depth psychology converges, offering a path not of forceful control, but of profound surrender. Not a passive resignation, but an active trust in the unfolding of life. It's the recognition that much of what we attempt to control is beyond our influence, and that true power lies in mastering our internal response to external events. This isn't about apathy. It's about discerning what is within our sphere of influence and what is not, and directing our energy wisely. The energy we expend in trying to force outcomes, to manipulate circumstances, could be far more fruitfully directed towards cultivating inner resilience, clarity, and acceptance. This journey of inner transformation, then, is not about achieving a state of perpetual bliss or eradicating all negative experiences. It is about cultivating a more conscious relationship with our inner world, one that allows us to navigate the inevitable ups and downs of life with greater equanimity and wisdom. It's about understanding that the most potent tool for change lies not in external manipulation, but in the subtle yet powerful act of directing our attention. The ability to observe our thoughts and feelings without immediate identification or judgment is the key that unlocks a profound sense of inner freedom. It's the difference between being tossed about by the waves of emotion and being a steady vessel that can ride them. This is the promise held within the practice of simply paying attention, not with the aim of changing what we find, but with the radical intention of seeing it clearly just as it is. This foundational shift in perspective is the first step towards rewiring our brains, not through a miraculous intervention, but through the consistent application of mindful awareness. The challenge, then, is to translate this understanding into lived experience. How do we move from intellectual assent to embodied reality? It begins with a gentle commitment to noticing the automatic judgments that arise, the habitual patterns of thought, the emotional responses that color our perceptions. It's about cultivating a space between stimulus and response, a pause where conscious choice can emerge. This is not about striving for perfection or achieving some unattainable state of enlightenment. It is about embracing the process, the daily practice of returning to awareness again and again. It's about understanding that the greatest miracles are not the sudden shifts, but the quiet, consistent cultivation of presence. This is the path we will explore together, a path that leads not to an escape from life, but to a deeper, more conscious engagement with it. It is a path that promises not the elimination of struggle, but the transformation of our relationship to it, ultimately leading to a more authentic and fulfilling existence. The preceding exploration touched upon the foundational shift in attention as a means to reorient our inner experience, moving away from a reactive stance towards one of observation. Now let's delve deeper into the mechanics of this observation, particularly as illuminated by the phenomenological insights of Edmund Husserl and their resonance with Carl Jung's analytical psychology. Husserl's method of epoche or bracketing is not merely an intellectual exercise. It's a practical discipline for suspending our natural, often unexamined assumptions and beliefs about the world and our experiences within it. This involves setting aside our preconceived notions, our emotional biases, our ingrained interpretations, and simply attending to the pure phenomenon as it presents itself to consciousness. Think of it like clearing a lens that has been smudged with the residue of past experiences. The smudges are not inherently bad, but they obscure the clarity of what is actually before us. When we apply this to our internal landscape, it means observing a thought, an emotion, or a sensation not as mine, to be judged, or real, to be acted upon, but as an event occurring within consciousness. Furthermore, this act of bracketing invites us to distinguish between the act of experiencing and the content of the experience. We are not our anxious thoughts, nor are we our fleeting feelings of sadness. We are the awareness that perceives these states. Jung, in his exploration of the psyche, often spoke of the transcendent function, a process where conscious and unconscious elements can interact, leading to new insights and a more integrated personality. The epoche, in a sense, can be seen as a preliminary step towards activating this function. By ceasing to engage in our usual, often defense-oriented reactions to inner content, we create a receptive space for deeper layers of the psyche to emerge and communicate. This isn't about passively waiting for something to happen. It's about actively creating the conditions for a more authentic encounter with ourselves. When a difficult emotion arises, our default is often to either push it away or become completely consumed by it, leading to a reinforcement of its power. Bracketing allows us to hold it with a gentle, non-judgmental awareness, acknowledging its presence without allowing it to dictate our actions or define our identity. Consider, for instance, a moment of intense frustration in traffic. The habitual response might be a surge of anger, a barrage of critical thoughts about other drivers, and a sense of personal injustice. Applying the epoche here would involve a conscious effort to observe these phenomena as they arise. Noticing the physical sensations of tension in the shoulders, the tightening in the chest, the mental commentary that labels the situation as unbearable. The goal is not to suppress the frustration or pretend it doesn't exist, but to see it as a transient event, a pattern of mental and emotional activity. This detachment, this stepping back, allows us to see the structure of our reaction, the underlying beliefs and assumptions that fuel it. It's like a scientist observing a phenomenon in a lab, meticulously noting its characteristics without personal investment. This objective stance, when consistently practiced, begins to loosen the grip of the habitual response. We start to realize that the frustration is not an inherent part of the traffic jam, but a construction of our own minds, amplified by our identification with it. Conversely, the absence of this non-judgmental attention leads to what many psychological frameworks describe as ego inflation or ego diffusion. When we are entirely identified with our thoughts and emotions, our sense of self becomes fragile, easily threatened by external circumstances or internal disturbances. We project our inner turmoil onto the world, seeing antagonists everywhere, or we retreat into a defensive shell, convinced of our own righteousness. This lack of conscious discernment creates a feedback loop where our internal state dictates our external perception, and our external perception, in turn, reinforces our internal state. The energy that could be used for growth, for creativity, for genuine connection, is instead consumed by the relentless effort to defend a narrowly defined and often inaccurate self-image. This is where the non-judgmental attention becomes not just a tool for peace, but a crucial mechanism for psychological integration, allowing for a more expansive and resilient sense of self to emerge. It's the dawning realization that the I that is judging, fearing, or desiring is itself a phenomenon that can be observed, understood, and ultimately transcended. The capacity for non-judgmental attention, once cultivated, opens a profound avenue for understanding the nature of our internal compass, our values, and our deepest motivations. When we habitually react to life through a lens of conditioned judgment, we often find ourselves chasing external validations or conforming to societal expectations that are misaligned with our authentic selves. This creates a subtle but persistent dissonance, a feeling of being adrift without a true north. By learning to observe our internal landscape without immediate condemnation, we begin to discern the subtle currents of genuine desire versus those that are mere echoes of external pressures. For instance, when faced with a choice that feels difficult, instead of immediately labeling one option as right and the other as wrong based on past conditioning or fear of judgment, we can practice observing the raw feelings, the intuitive nudges, and the underlying values that each option engages. This allows for a more nuanced understanding of what truly resonates with our core being, moving us away from a life dictated by external approval and towards one guided by an inner sense of integrity. Furthermore, this practice illuminates the subtle ways in which our perceived desires are often projections of unmet needs or compensatory mechanisms for past hurts. A craving for constant praise, for example, might not stem from a genuine love of recognition, but from an underlying insecurity or a historical lack of validation. By observing this craving non-judgmentally, we can begin to explore its roots without the immediate impulse to either indulge or suppress it. This exploration can reveal a deeper, more fundamental need for self-acceptance or a sense of inherent worth, which, when addressed directly, can dissolve the superficial craving. This is not about self-criticism, but about a compassionate inquiry into the origins of our drives. It's akin to understanding the symptoms of an illness to treat the underlying cause, rather than merely masking the discomfort. This deeper understanding empowers us to make choices that genuinely nourish our well-being, rather than perpetuating patterns that leave us feeling empty or unfulfilled. Building on this, consider how this non-judgmental observation can transform our relationship with ambition and achievement. Often, our goals are driven by an unconscious need to prove ourselves, to fill a perceived void, or to measure up to an external standard. When we approach our ambitions with a critical eye, we can become paralyzed by self-doubt or driven by an insatiable hunger for more, never truly satisfied with what we achieve. However, by observing the process of our striving without judgment, we can begin to differentiate between genuine passion and the anxious pursuit of external validation. For example, when working on a challenging project, instead of focusing solely on the outcome and judging every perceived misstep as a failure, we can practice observing our engagement with the task itself. We can notice the moments of flow, the sparks of creativity, the resilience in the face of obstacles, all without the overlay of harsh self-criticism. This shift in focus allows us to derive satisfaction from the journey, fostering a sustainable sense of motivation rooted in intrinsic interest rather than external pressure. Conversely, this practice also offers a profound recalibration for periods of perceived stagnation or inactivity. In a culture that often equates busyness with value, moments of rest or introspection can be met with internal criticism, leading to feelings of guilt or inadequacy. By applying non-judgmental attention during these times, we can observe the natural rhythms of energy and rest without labeling them as laziness or failure. This allows us to recognize that periods of quietude are often fertile ground for creativity, integration, and deep renewal. It's during these seemingly unproductive moments that insights often arise, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and our path can emerge. For instance, when feeling uninspired or unmotivated, instead of berating oneself for a lack of productivity, One can simply observe the state of inertia with curiosity. This observation might reveal underlying fatigue, a need for a different kind of stimulation, or simply the natural ebb and flow of creative energy. This acceptance fosters a more compassionate and sustainable approach to personal growth, recognizing that progress is not always linear and that periods of stillness are as vital as periods of action. Consequently, this cultivated capacity for detached observation becomes a powerful antidote to the pervasive anxiety that often accompanies uncertainty. When faced with unknown futures or ambiguous situations, our minds tend to leap to worst-case scenarios, fueled by a history of judgmental interpretations. By practicing non-judgmental attention, we can intercept these anxious thought patterns before they gain momentum. Instead of immediately identifying with the fear, we can observe it as a mental event, acknowledging its presence without allowing it to dictate our response. This creates a crucial space for clarity to emerge, allowing us to assess the situation more realistically and to respond with greater wisdom and resilience. It's about recognizing that the future is not a fixed entity to be feared, but an unfolding process that we can engage with, one present moment at a time, with a clear and steady awareness, unburdened by the weight of premature judgment. The profound shift from reactive judgment to non-judgmental observation fundamentally alters our capacity for authentic presence, moving us beyond mere awareness to an active engagement with the unfolding moment. This isn't simply about noticing what is happening. It's about cultivating an attitude of open receptivity, a willingness to be fully present with whatever arises without the immediate impulse to categorize, control, or dismiss. This active presence is the bedrock upon which genuine connection with oneself and with others is built. When we are truly present, our interactions become less about projecting our internal states and more about receiving the other person or situation as they are. Think about conversations where one person is merely waiting for their turn to speak, formulating their reply while the other is still talking. This is the antithesis of presence. In contrast, a present individual listens not just to the words, but to the underlying emotions, the unspoken needs, the subtle nuances of communication. This level of attunement fosters a sense of being seen and understood, creating the fertile ground for deep and meaningful relationships. Furthermore, consider the impact of this active presence on creativity and problem-solving. When we are not bogged down by self-judgment or the fear of making mistakes, our minds become more fluid and open to novel solutions. This is where the insights from psychological exploration into flow states become particularly relevant. A flow state, characterized by deep immersion and energized focus, is often achieved when an individual is fully engaged in a task that is challenging yet within their skill set, and when the feedback is immediate and clear. Non-judgmental attention is a crucial prerequisite for accessing these states. By suspending the inner critic that might dismiss nascent ideas or magnify perceived flaws, we allow for experimentation, for the exploration of unconventional pathways. Imagine an artist, not judging every brushstroke as it appears on the canvas, but allowing the colors and forms to emerge organically, responding to each new development with an open and curious mind. This dynamic interaction, this dance between intention and spontaneous unfolding, is the essence of creative presence. It allows for a more authentic expression to manifest, free from the constraints of preconceived notions of what the final product should be. Conversely, the absence of this active presence can lead to a pervasive sense of disconnection, even in the midst of social interaction or engaging activities. We can find ourselves physically present but mentally miles away, caught in the echo chamber of our own thoughts. This fragmentation of attention diminishes the richness of our experiences, turning potentially vibrant moments into dull, superficial encounters. For example, consider the experience of eating a meal while simultaneously scrolling through social media. The sensory input of the food, its taste, texture, aroma, is dulled, and the mindful appreciation of the nourishment is lost. The mind is bifurcated, unable to fully engage with either activity. This state of divided attention not only impoverishes our immediate experience, but also, over time, erodes our capacity for deep focus and sustained engagement, making it increasingly difficult to access those states of flow and presence that are so vital for a fulfilling life. Another crucial layer to this active presence is its role in cultivating resilience in the face of adversity. When challenges arise, our instinct can be to withdraw, to resist, or to become overwhelmed by negative emotions. However, a practiced presence allows us to meet these difficulties with a steadier gaze. Instead of being swept away by the tide of fear or despair, we can learn to observe these emotions without becoming them. This doesn't mean the emotions disappear instantly, but our relationship to them shifts. We can acknowledge their presence, understand their transient nature, and choose our response rather than being dictated by it. Think of a sailor navigating a storm. While the waves may be powerful, the sailor remains focused on steering the ship, adapting to the conditions, and holding a clear intention despite the external chaos. This active, present engagement with the challenge, rather than passive succumbing to it, is what allows for safe passage. It's the difference between being a victim of circumstance and an agent of one's own experience, even when facing significant hardship. This ability to remain grounded and responsive, even when the external world feels overwhelming, is a hallmark of a deeply present and resilient individual. As we stand at the threshold of this contemplative exploration, the accumulated insights begin to coalesce, not as a discrete list of lessons learned, but as a subtle shift in our internal landscape. The journey from a reactive engagement with our inner world to a more conscious, observant stance has illuminated the potential for profound inner recalibration. This reorientation, initiated through a gentle yet persistent redirection of our attention, has begun to reveal the intricate tapestry of our being, not as a fixed entity to be wrestled with, but as a dynamic unfolding that can be met with a different quality of presence. The very mechanisms of our thought and emotion, once perceived as immutable forces, are now appearing as phenomena that can be witnessed, understood, and ultimately engaged with in a manner that fosters greater ease and clarity. Drawing these diverse threads together, we perceive a convergence of understanding that speaks to a fundamental truth. The power to transform our experience lies not in external manipulation, but in the subtle yet potent art of internal discernment. The constant hum of our inner dialogue, the habitual patterns of judgment and reaction that have long dictated our perceptions, begin to soften when met with a sustained, compassionate gaze. This is not a process of eradication, but of integration, a gentle unfolding that allows for the emergence of a more spacious and resilient self. The initial provocations, the philosophical underpinnings, and the practical applications of this awareness now converge, creating an internal resonance that prepares us for the final integration of this profound shift in perspective. Reflecting on this journey so far, we can sense the cumulative effect of these insights. It is akin to a landscape gradually coming into sharper focus, where the fog of habitual perception begins to lift, revealing the contours of a more authentic terrain. The subtle energies that shape our awareness, the processes of healing and surrender, and the practical cultivation of presence have all contributed to this evolving clarity. As we pivot towards the final reflection, the implications of this integrated understanding become not merely intellectual, but deeply experiential, suggesting a way forward that is both grounded and liberating, a path walked with greater intention and an awakened heart. The true practice, then, is not found in the grand gesture or the miraculous intervention, but in the quiet, unwavering commitment to attend. It is in the subtle art of noticing, of holding our inner experiences with a gentle, non-judgmental awareness that we begin to unravel the knots of our own making. This is the profound implication of our journey, that the power to transform lies not in altering external circumstances, but in reorienting the very lens through which we perceive them. We have explored how the habit of judgment, born from identification with fleeting thoughts and emotions, creates a world of perceived limitations. Yet, through the cultivation of a detached yet compassionate observation, we begin to discern a vaster, more resilient self, a witness that can observe the storm without being consumed by it. This is the essence of freedom, not the absence of challenges, but the ability to navigate them with clarity and equanimity, understanding that our internal landscape is not a prison, but a dynamic, ever-shifting terrain that we can learn to traverse with grace. This reorientation is not a destination, but a continuous unfolding, a practice that deepens with each moment of conscious presence. It is the gentle recognition that the energy we once spent in futile attempts to control or suppress our inner world can now be channeled into a more authentic engagement with life. When we cease to be prisoners of our own internal narratives, we unlock the capacity for genuine connection, for creativity that flows unimpeded, and for a resilience that can weather any storm. The insights gleaned from phenomenology and depth psychology are not abstract theories, but invitations to embody a different way of being, a way that honors the full spectrum of human experience without being defined by its darker hues. It is in this space of open receptivity that healing occurs, not as a sudden cure, but as a gradual integration, a coming home to ourselves. The true miracle, therefore, is not an external event, but the quiet awakening of our own inherent capacity for presence. It is the realization that within the ceaseless flow of consciousness there exists a stillness, a space of pure awareness that is untouched by the turbulence of thought and emotion. To cultivate this presence is to begin to live from a place of deeper wisdom, to respond to life's complexities not from a position of fear or reactivity, but from a foundation of inner peace. This journey, though subtle, is transformative, inviting us to step out of the shadows of our conditioned selves and into the light of our true nature. The path ahead is not one of striving for an idealized state, but of embracing the present moment, just as it is, with open eyes and an open heart. The work continues, not in seeking, but in seeing. The true practice begins now in the simple, profound act of being.